Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn. And on today's episode, we have reoccurring guest, Dr. Mike Molloy. And our topic is going to be specifically on PEDs. Now, we've talked about PEDs in some different episodes, talking about hormones, talking about different ways that we've competed in the past, specifically in weightlifting. But we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into PEDs, the different ones that people are potentially using these days, what the differences are between using them in a competitive sense versus just for aesthetics versus longevity, some of the pros and cons to all of those things, some of the things that Mike seems to be a little bit more keyed in on with regards to how they're being used, some of the detrimental effects in the long term. We hope you guys enjoy this one and hopefully get something new out of the conversation around PEDs. Of course, we have Dr. Mike Molloy with us again, who is one of our recurring guests, one of our close friends in the Power Monkey community. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Do you prefer Dr. Mike or Dr. Molloy?
Mike's good.
I want to make sure
I do not. If my wife was here, she would say you should just go by Mike because you're not a real doctor. So it's all good. So we should probably just go with Mike so I don't catch a mountain of shit from her if she hears that.
That's true. When you have a real doctor in the house, you have to go with what she says.
Yeah. She's like, you're a doctor of philosophy. She's like, I'm a surgeon. So it's
I was telling him last time I only call him Dr. Mike when it benefits me. So like if I'm using him, for some sort of credential or something. So there you go.
For sure.
So with that being said, Mike,
yes.
How things going, buddy?
Things are good. Just moved to Philadelphia, getting settled in here, new community, and off to the CrossFit Games here in a couple of days. Yes. So I'm excited.
Yes, we're recording this right before all the fun starts, and again, Madison this week. So kind of keep that in mind as you're listening. We don't know any of the results from what happened in Madison, but really quickly before we get into the topic of the day, Mike, are you automatically now an Eagles and a Phillies fan? Is that what happened?
No. I'm so obviously a New England sports guy from the Massachusetts area, but I'll be honest, I don't know that I'm brave enough to wear a Patriots jersey around the city of Philadelphia. I don't really want egg on me that badly, so I'm gonna go with no.
That would be the nicest thing that they would throw at you. Philly fans are like brutal. Coming from Jersey, like they are the worst fans in the world.
They're aggressive.
Committed. They love their teams and they really despise everyone else. But I didn't know if that was kind of prerequisite.
No, they booed Santa, so I don't need that. I don't need that energy in my life. I'm good.
Well, hopefully enjoy Philly. I know you're going to be there for a little while, but
for sure,
we'll jump into the topic of the day here. We are going to be just staying on one topic today.
Yeah,
one that's been in the headlines a lot, not just recently, but obviously in the sport and world that we live in. It comes in and out quite often. PEDs, and especially in the world that Chad lives in, it's a constant topic that comes up. We just wanted to go over some of your thoughts with regards to what we're seeing these days in the PED world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the sport of CrossFit just kind of had in the last, month or so, I would say kind of like a bombshell number of people test positive coming out of the sanctionals. A lot of people on teams, but also individuals. And I don't think it'll be the last we see of it. I don't know how much, say, the masters athletes are necessarily tested from the online qualifying stage. I think they're mostly tested at the games. And so I don't think this will be the end of it. And I don't think this will be the last year that we see it either. So it's a hot button topic, to say the least.
Yeah, I can't imagine that it's the end of, the positive that's coming about. But I do want to kind of go into first, just can we just go through a quick rundown? I would say quick rundown, it ends up being the entire conversation because these things are so in-depth. But what we're seeing in terms of what people are taking, I know that's a pretty wide range, but I just want to go over a few that we're seeing as kind of the primary ones. And I think testosterone is kind of the top of the list there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think within the sport of CrossFit, it's a little bit unique. But let's broaden the conversation out to weightlifting, and things that the Power Monkey community kind of encompasses overall. So yeah, testosterone is obviously like a really, popular performance enhancing drug. It's extremely potent. It's extremely effective. And, from a functional level, you're basically taking a hormone or, a hormone that looks functionally like a human one and injecting it for the most part into your body. And in that situation, what it's doing is taking your normal testosterone levels, which may be, middle of the range, and it's bringing them up either to the highest level sort of that you might achieve naturally or even beyond that. And there's a lot of, performance enhancing benefits to having really high testosterone levels. You're going to grow muscle relatively more easily. You're going to recover better. Even things like you're going to have more red blood cells. So performance enhancing effects on just strength workouts may increase as well. So a lot of benefits there. And then there's of course consequences to it as well. We can go into all of that, but that's one major category.
Yep, and we discussed a lot of testosterone in the second one on this list, HGH, a little bit on our hormone-specific episode. So I would encourage listeners to go and listen to that episode if you want a little bit more in-depth conversation around HGH and testosterone specifically. But aside from HGH, which was next on the list here, which I don't know if you want to mention anything specific in terms of the differences between.
Yeah, I mean, growth hormone. So testosterone is like a big androgenic hormone. So basically going to drive a lot of muscle building properties. HGH, I think, from our perspective, is more of like a recovery hormone, right? So growth hormone is produced in response to exercise, and it's sort of responsible for the healing of muscles. And so think about it from my perspective of testosterone grow bigger muscles. Growth hormone would be like repair the ones that are there. So like, as a good example, what was a big baseball player like Andy Pettit, never took anything in his life, gets hurt, decides to try growth hormone to speed the recovery process, as an example.
Yeah, so with that, people are using testosterone and getting popped for that. Is anyone that you know of getting popped for HGH? And then to add to that, where is that coming from? There's the deer antler discussion, for example. Are they getting sufficient amount of HGH if they're using deer antler?
Honestly, I haven't seen anybody from within our community testing positive for growth hormone. It's much more the other stuff that we're about to get to in a minute. If you can find it, I think honestly, Chad, if you get something that's like a true deer, deer antler velvet extract, that's not containing growth hormone. What's happening, we could talk about this in a minute, is people are selling it as a label and they're just putting growth hormone in it. You know what I mean? And the benefits of that, especially if it's an oral thing where really for HGH, you need a cream or an injection for it to work, are really, really minimal. Within the bodybuilding community, testosterone and HGH can often go hand in hand. I know some relatively elite bodybuilders that basically say HGH is relatively worthless in the absence of high testosterone levels. But, so from our community, I really haven't seen, like, you don't see it on the morning chalk up or, CrossFitGames.com. You're not seeing HGH pop too frequently, if at all.
Now, the one that I want to spend a little bit more time on, because I feel like it's probably the one that's a little bit more prevalent and more under the radar for the everyday community, are peptides. We discussed these a little bit in terms of what they do and how people are using them.
Yeah, so the concept with peptides is that basically you can take really, all right, so let's kind of back up a second. So all proteins in the body are made up of 20 different amino acids. And think of them as sort of like Lego blocks. And if you break those into small chunks, you end up with what are peptides. And so sometimes you can replace an entire hormone with just a small peptide. And so naturally, what people are trying to do with these things, it's not necessarily that they're trying to replace all of testosterone, which isn't really possible, or all of growth hormone with a small peptide. What they're doing is they're taking these peptides, and those things are just similar enough to the whole functional protein that they can send a signal to a cell, in this case, to release a lot of growth hormone. So think of it as another path of inducing higher production of human growth hormone, insulin growth factor 1, both of which are majorly beneficial to recovery from workouts, to growth and things like that. So there's, like, if I'm not mistaken, there's like 3 different classes. There's like growth hormone releasing peptides. There's another one that mimics the function of a satiety and a hunger hormone called ghrelin, which would be really helpful for people that are trying to really lean out and things of that nature. And then another one called growth hormone releasing peptides. They're all basically doing the same functional thing. They're a lot more stable. They're a lot cheaper. They're a lot like less easier. They're a lot easier, in my opinion, to kind of mess up. And people think on some level, though there really is no strong evidence to support these, that they might be safer than taking, pure growth hormone or pure testosterone, because it's causing the body to release it, therefore it can be regulated. It's causing the body to make its own growth hormone versus taking something that might be like, for lack of a better term, like a sheep growth hormone or a cow growth hormone or a pig one, which are similar but not identical. So that's sort of the thought process behind it. But yeah, they're just as fraught with potential side effects, and the places that you're going to buy them from are generally unscrupulous, and you don't really know what the hell you're buying. So lots of problems from this that I would personally avoid.
I want to just touch on something you said there. One is that people are jumping maybe to peptides. One, because of the fact that it's releasing your own natural hormones from like a stepping stone to releasing HGH and things like that. But you said that also there's the possibility of them being less negative in terms of the later effects, but they're just unknown, right? Are you saying that it's more unknown in terms of long-term testing, or that there is actual evidence showing them to be less negative?
It's a great question. So let's back up for 1 second. So most of the time when these things are discovered, it's not some like PED chemist or biologist sitting in a lab somewhere creating new compounds to give to athletes, right? Like there's just not the financials around that. Maybe in Russia, I guess, possibly with like, the Icarus movie and things like that, maybe, if you have a drug sponsored sort of doping entity. But really what's going on for the most part is there are people from the actual research community that are trying to develop drugs to treat people that have actual diseases.
Right.
As in the really popular one that relates to this sort of demographic that has been abusing them is people that have muscular dystrophy, right? So genetic diseases that cause muscle wasting and breakdown and all of those types of things. And so you try to find drugs that will cause, the generation of new muscle or the healing of muscle to keep these people alive as long as possible, because generally they're dying due to a complete loss of muscle function. And so people see these research articles that are helping people with muscular dystrophy or trying to, and then they use them for alternative purposes, right? And so most of those drugs end up failing, like the vast majority. I don't actually know of any like really highly effective drugs for muscular dystrophy out there. And so for the most part, as it relates to efficacy in a person who's not suffering from, a life-threatening disease, as well as a safety point of view, we're really not testing the same individuals, and we really aren't looking for the same things. But you do get some previews on things like liver toxicity and things like that, and they are generally lower than taking pure testosterone. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is super interesting, and it's actually a topic that I wanted to get into a little bit later in the conversation, but it seems like it fits in really well here, and it has to do with purpose of taking a PED. And we call it PED as it relates specifically to competitive situations. But there are definitely groups of people that are not competitive,
right,
that might want to take a peptide or might want to take testosterone or might want to take HGH or some of these other ones that we're going to be talking about. And I think we have to talk about what the goal is here. What is the goal of the person that's actually taking them? Let's set aside the competitive situation for a second and say that it's banned from, the CrossFit Games or the Olympics or whatever else it might be. If you're doing this for performance, it's one thing. If you're doing it for aesthetics, it's another. And if you're doing it for potential longevity, and these are the other two items that I wanted to talk about. From just an aesthetic standpoint, do the benefits outweigh the negatives for someone like you? Would you recognize, because I have a lot of people within our community that are taking, say, hey, I'm not looking to go to the CrossFit Games. I just want to look better with my bathing suit on, and I want to look better when I'm out at the beach or whatever. And it's helping those things, and it's helping me create a life that I feel healthier. I feel like I'm in more control of the body that I want. From an aesthetic standpoint, what are your views on the use of these drugs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a number of them are extremely beneficial in the aesthetic compartment. So something like taking testosterone is going to cause you to have larger muscle, not even before they get stronger. You're just going to look more for lack of a better term, swole. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be able to handle a lower body fat percentage while increasing muscle mass and things like that. So like from a perspective of aesthetics, if I wanted to get like really big and really strong, like let's say I want to go be, 225, I'm about like 185 right now, roughly. So I want to add 40 pounds of muscle, right? To do that, I'm going to gain a substantial amount of body fat. And for me to even try and be whatever, 15% of that body weight is not going to happen for my genetics. Like I can get to 225, no problem. I can get way stronger, but I'm not going to look great aesthetically. With something like testosterone, I have the ability to add that muscle without the addition of fat. And I can maintain a higher body weight at a lower body fat percentage much, much more easily if compared to basically not being able to do it at all. Mm-hmm. In aging populations, so people like, as you approach 40s and 50s and stuff, testosterone levels decline. People go on testosterone, they're like, yeah, my virility feels great. I have, visible abs again. I can eat whatever the hell I want to and look amazing. All of those things are benefits for sure. And I'm not here to tell you whether you should or you shouldn't, but like on the flip side of that is, from my understanding, you're going to experience one of three phenomenon, if not more. So you're either going to have gynecomastia, which is basically you're going to develop breast tissue, right? 2, you're going to have relatively severe acne, usually on like the back. And then 3 is like you may have your testicles shrink to the point where they have the ability to go back inside your body even. And potential hair loss being another one that's I don't know if you want to consider a serious one, but it's definitely a side effect as well. And so you're going to probably have one, if not more, of those side effects, especially if you don't really know what you're doing and you start to abuse these things, because you can take too much, you can take it for too long, and without somebody that really knows what they're doing, and I would be abundantly clear that the doctors that are just writing prescriptions for this stuff willy-nilly do not know what they're doing. You can get yourself into some real problems with this stuff where you've got sky high estrogen levels or all kinds of other issues that you really don't want. So even if you're like, hey, that sounds like something I want, I'm willing to make that that trade-off, that health trade-off. And to be clear, there's lots of other stuff I haven't even touched on yet. You should still find yourself educated resources that know what they're doing to help you know how much to take, where to get your levels checked, when to cycle off, how to cycle off, things that you should be taking in addition to your testosterone to prevent you from having all of those issues that we were just discussing. So yeah, that's something that even if you want to go down that path, like you need to have someone in your corner that knows what they're doing. And like I'm 50% of the way there, maybe 75. There's people you really want to get somebody that's closer to like 90, 95%.
This is super. Chad, you want to jump in there? I have some more
Yeah.
questions, but go for it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, because we're talking about aesthetics right now. Obviously, there's the performance part of it, which the CrossFitters and weightlifters are more so getting popped for. Now, there's a difference in CrossFit and weightlifting in that CrossFit doesn't have to worry about weight classes. So
Right.
for weightlifting, and me kind of being in the middle of all this and seeing all these athletes, male and female, that I've seen get popped, some of them you can say, hey, they look like they've taken something,
Right.
but other ones, they don't look like they've done anything. So is it
Yeah.
testosterone that they're still taking, or is it something different, or are they controlling their body weight? They're
Yeah.
limiting muscle growth by nutrition.
Yeah. So I would say that there's like for weightlifting, it's a different, like there's both similar and different things, right? So there's, huge benefits in weightlifting to taking something like testosterone, growth hormone, even potentially as well as another other compounds. Perhaps different than say bodybuilding or even CrossFit. But with the weight manipulation, there's a whole other class of things that are illegal as it relates to like water manipulation and things like that will cause you to basically flush incredible amounts of fluid from your body really, really quickly. And then you can bring them, that water back in still relatively quickly and then go perform at, like weights that are relatively, ungodly for what you're actually supposed to be competing in. And that's why they've been deemed illegal. So there is stuff like that, as it relates to an athlete that perhaps, doesn't look like they're quote unquote, doping or taking something, but they are. I think I'd just be careful with that from the perspective of they may be taking those things and getting themselves substantially bigger and stronger and everything else without focusing on more of the aesthetic side of things, which is like doing so at a reduced calorie count. They're just being like, I'm going to hit the gas pedal as hard as I fucking can. And I don't care how much body fat I gain in that process. So they may not look as visibly ripped as someone who's doing the testosterone to stay really strong at a really low body weight. To some extent, that probably has to do with weight classes and things of that nature as well,
Yeah, definitely. It's just interesting to see a female, for example, that looks very feminine, that doesn't look like, even athletes that really don't even look like they're weightlifters, but they're moving a tremendous amount of weight, and maybe they get popped. So it's like a really confusing part of it.
100%.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think some of that also comes down to these next generation of compounds that we haven't touched upon yet. Maybe now's a good time to. And specifically the one that you actually do see people starting to get a lot of, pop for within CrossFit and within weightlifting, which are the SARMs. And SARMs stands for Selective Androgen Receptor Modulator. So basically, these are oral compounds that you take that people have developed to try and replicate the beneficial aspects of taking something like testosterone without as many of the side effects, and to varying degrees of success, to say the least. But yeah, so like, for example, a woman may choose to use a different set of performance enhancing drugs to get herself aesthetically or strength wise to another level comparative to a man, right? So women, like in general, obviously are never meant to have testosterone levels that are as elevated as men do, right? And so in that situation, they will oftentimes use different compounds, aromatase inhibitors, all kinds of other stuff to try and just basically bump that number up a little bit, or use other compounds that are more are targeting different pathways and things of that nature. So it's a whole game for women, and the ones that are in those clearly doping sports where like it's out there, it's in the open. You could think about everything from certain divisions of like powerlifting, but also maybe even like wrestling and stuff like that, like like TV wrestling, where there is that visuality of like a much more what we would stereotypically call a masculine appearance with a really large jawline and things of that nature. That's more from like really pushing that testosterone level hard and heavy and for a long time, like a long time.
Yeah. Mike, can you mention it one more time exactly? Maybe I wasn't paying full attention here, but I just really want to understand better, because SARMs to me is something fairly new. I've been reading a little bit about it, but can you again just delineate a little bit between what happens with the previous PEDs that we've been talking about and what's happening now with SARMs exactly?
As it relates to like what
just
aspect?
how it's being used and what it's doing to the body in terms of its performance enhancing.
Right. Okay. So, we just covered testosterone, enhanced muscle growth, recovery, lower body fat levels, higher, body weight, all that good stuff. But like we talked about, gynemastica, acne, hair loss, liver toxicity, what else? Increased risk of heart attack and stroke, and all that stuff. And so these selective androgen receptor modulators were developed to try and recapitulate the beneficial aspects of testosterone while not necessarily driving all of the negative ones. And the thought process is that testosterone binds different parts of different receptors in different parts of the body. And if you could target the ones that are only found in muscle tissue, you would say, I can make bigger muscles without, making your heart bigger, or causing your body to produce tons of more red blood cells, which makes you at higher risk for clots, thereby increasing your chance of heart disease, stroke, etc. And so what they did is they created all these compounds, again, in labs for purposes that have nothing to do with blood doping. And they are oral, so people like that because people generally don't like needles, and never mind injecting themselves with a needle. And now what we're trying to figure out is whether or not A, they're as effective, and B, if they're actually as safe as people that are marketing them claim them to be. Because to be clear, no one's shown these things to be safe on the the medicinal side of things yet.
So again, it's similar to what we were talking about before. It's not that no one's shown them to be safe. It's just that
Yeah.
not enough time has gone by to be able to effectively
Yeah.
show long-term effects.
Or maybe it's never going to, right? So like, for example, a couple of these compounds, we put them into patients with muscular dystrophy, and because they were not efficacious, even though they look great preclinically in mouse models and stuff like that. When they got to humans, they didn't work. And so the companies that are not going to spend $500 million to figure out if a compound's safe if it's not efficacious. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so there's just no benefit. So then people will go online that are, relatively smart, and they say, aha, whatever, Osterine or something like that made this mouse much more fit, athletic, and stronger. I'm going to take that. And we'll just never know, essentially. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. And along the same lines, maybe an athlete's taking it now, but to be able to test for it also is something that will take some additional time. And this is another topic in here, this imbalance between the new drugs that are being used and the testing for the drugs that USADA, WADA, and any other drug agency is using to detect whether or not actually someone's using it. And there seems to be a few year imbalance between those two.
Yeah, exactly. So, the game is getting better and faster and catching up relatively quickly because the technology is just getting so much better on the detection side of things. It used to be, a couple of decades ago, you kind of had to know exactly what to look for and be like, okay, I'm going to take, John's blood, and I'm going to look to see whether or not I can find like essentially these mass spec peaks that indicate exactly what these things are. But now, we have entire like libraries, databases of sort of like unknown compounds and what they look like. So even if we don't know that, let's say whatever, there's a new SARM that comes out that no one has seen before, what they'll look for is in that person's blood. They'll be like, what the hell is that thing? What is that peak? We've literally never seen that before. And we have no idea what it is, right? And so that person may not necessarily get busted for it on the spot because it's not, quote, on the banned list yet. So you can't kick somebody out for not necessarily using something that isn't banned. But it triggers the process of really rapid identification of like what that compound is and where it might be coming from. Additionally, I do think that there are actual sports. I don't know about WADA, but basically if you have unknown compounds in your blood that are essentially like very much not supposed to be there, that's enough for them to basically be like, you're taking something, we don't know what it is yet, but like that's not allowed. Chad might know more about this actually through his involvement in the Olympics than I do, but there's enough education from a testing perspective now to try to get around that approach. But yeah, it is still, the testing game is constantly trying to catch up to the generation of new compounds, and really smart chemists, especially from other countries and stuff, if they're motivated, can make subtle adjustments to, we'll put an oxygen group here or hydroxyl group there or whatever, and we're going to completely change what this looks like, but it's functionally identical, So that's a really hard thing for testers to catch up with,
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's constantly, it feels like you're constantly running at a, in mud versus someone that,
Exactly.
and you're running with lead shoes on.
Exactly. And to be clear, like, the people that the testing agencies have to some extent play by the rules and the books versus the people that are creating the compounds or taking them. It's the wild, wild west, right? It's sort of like, I would imagine to some extent, being like a drug dealer versus like a drug enforcement agency officer. Like one of you gets to do whatever the hell you want, whenever the hell you want. The other one has to go get, warrants and, all that stuff to make things happen. It's sort of like the same concept, I think.
There's one more on the list here that I want to touch on, but just in this play out, like, just bear with me here, this idea of playing out 10, 20, 30 years in the future of constantly creating things that are less detectable or more like your body is actually generating these things on their own. What about the possibility of just genetic manipulation?
Oh, totally.
Early on, like.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things to consider on that front, and actually that we're dealing with right now. So within sports, like, I think a good example would be something like the Tour de France, but like, to be clear, it's in the NFL, it's in all the major sports that are making all kinds of money, where they're taking stuff that is bioidentical. Like, there's no difference, there's no change. And so, like, let's say I'm taking literally human testosterone. It's not some derivative, it's not some off-label thing. How am I supposed to test for that, right? It's not a foreign compound. It will look on a test just like human testosterone. And so if you have enough money, you can do that. Same thing with growth hormone. And so what the testing agencies look for is levels and ratios that are like possible versus impossible, right? And so specifically as it relates to something like testosterone, they look at ratios of that and they say, look, we sampled 100,000 people from a general population, and we know that this is what is 99.9999% of the people's range has fallen, and you're 25% higher than that. So even though I can't tell you what you're taking, you're cheating in your band, right? And I imagine that will be the approach that has to be used. So 30 years down the road, somebody decides, figured out a way through genetics. There's a pretty cool technology out there called CRISPR that I imagine could make this happen, where they're going to basically be like, we don't know how you did this, but you have done something to put yourself into a place that is biologically impossible. So one of two things have happened. Either you're literally like an X-Men, like you're a new evolution of human, and you're the first one ever, or you're cheating, And, once off, you might get away with it, but as it starts to become more popular, more people are doing it, and then it becomes, it'll become obvious. So yeah, it's a problem, it's a conundrum, but I do think that there are sort of ways to figure out how to get around it from a testing perspective.
So I'm sorry, Mike. All I heard there is that X-Men are real. That's all I got
Hopefully.
in the whole conversation.
Google CRISPR, man. It's freaking crazy.
Oh,
People do some nutso stuff with that, trying to self-cure their own STDs and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Unbelievable. It's going to be a fun couple of decades when it comes to this stuff.
For sure.
One more on the list here that, I think we see it primarily in the endurance world, tied to a lot of the doping scandals that we've seen within the cycling world over the past couple of decades, EPO specifically. But I'm curious about EPO as it relates to the CrossFit world and what we see on a daily basis and the benefits there. There are some events that would be considered endurance events that we do, but would you see a benefit for an athlete to take something like EPO in the CrossFit type setting?
Yeah, I mean, being bluntly honest, so erythropoietin, or EPO as we're calling it, is sort of like a hormone that causes the body to produce more red blood cells. The red blood cells carry oxygen to your muscles. And so think about CrossFit, where so much of the sport, especially at the competitive level, is about your ability to manage oxygen debt to your muscles. Like, so Hinshaw has talked about this, right? When you go from aerobic to anaerobic, you essentially have two choices. Like, either you slow down, you stop, or you're going to die. Like, those are your three options, right? You're going to pass out essentially. And so if you were able to produce twice as many red blood cells that carry twice as much oxygen, to your muscles, oxygen is the limiting factor that prevents, or that essentially prevents you from staying aerobic. So if you could deliver more to those muscles, there's a huge benefit within the sport. Ironically, I don't think I've found anybody on the doping page that's popped for it yet. Maybe just a matter of time, but I can't envision why it wouldn't be beneficial. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's the same reason why athletes train at altitude, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A CrossFitter to 7,000 feet and watch them suffer and struggle. Like, yeah, it's going to be a huge bit.
That was more, I think my question was, why haven't we seen this be popped more in the community? We're seeing more of the initial few that we've seen on the list rather than
being bluntly honest, I feel as though much of the reasons why people are taking steroids within the community for CrossFit is, while connected to performance, I think it probably originates from a level of aesthetic desire on some level too. Like, they want to get bigger and stronger because they see the loads that are being managed at the CrossFit Games or semifinals or something like that. And then I think the other aspect is, obviously there are people that are intentionally cheating, that know what they're doing, that are putting it into their body. I do think there's a large number of people that, I don't want to remove culpability, but I do think there's people that are taking supplements that are just straight up dirty. You know what I mean? And have things in there that are not advertised to be in there. And there have been cases of that where it's literally been confirmed, where the athlete was able to prove that said supplement had something in there that wasn't supposed to be there, and then they get popped for it. And, I feel for those athletes, but at this point where it's known to be an issue, if they're going to continue to get busted for it, it's their own fault. Like, it's a known issue. If you're going to be taking supplements, like, you have to be taking stuff that's tested. Like, it has to be NSF tested. Otherwise, you're just putting your career for 4 years at risk.
Now, Chad, I want to ask you this,
Yeah.
because obviously coming from weightlifting world, and we've discussed this quite a bit, and I think I kind of know your answer, but the reality is that, there are some athletes that are willing to take that risk, right? Mike, like knowingly taking things and say,
Yeah.
hey, if I test positive, that's the risk that goes along with it. When we saw that with even some of the CrossFit athletes who came out and said, yep, there was less of a, I can't believe it was probably something tainted in my food. No, it was a few like, I just needed the edge, and I was hoping that I wasn't going to be tested, and I was, and yeah, I'll deal with the ramifications of it. Do you feel like, Chad, from your perspective, that that's a lot of the perspective in the weightlifting world, where it's like everyone is doing this? I have to if I want to be competitive. I know you've never done it. You were an athlete that wanted to compete clean, but is it something that you feel across the board with the athletes that are podium, athletes, that it's just like, hey, it's the nature of the sport. It's something that comes along with being competitive at that level.
Right.
Yeah, I think what I've learned, just through the years and being around it and in conversations that I've been involved in and listened to in international competition, and from getting to know an athlete or two pretty well that has been in the game and done it. It's not even that they are saying, hey, everyone's doing it, so I need to do it. It's a matter of, as they were growing up and getting into the sport in their country, it was a part of their system. So they don't, it's like almost as if they don't, I think, they become an adult and they get to understand that people are testing positive, and it's against the rules. So in that aspect, they understand that it's wrong, but at the same time, it's a part of their system. I think, of course, I've thought a lot about this. It's like, I took creatine for many years, and if, after taking that for 5 or 10 years, if I felt I was benefiting from that, there was nothing wrong with it. It wasn't against the rules. It wasn't illegal. And then all of a sudden they made it illegal. Would I continue taking it? It would be kind of hard not to. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't want to make excuses for these athletes, but I completely understand, maybe not completely, but I do understand to an extent, and I sympathize with their position in their system. What they were told to do from coaches and leaders of their communities and their sports led them to take those illegal drugs. It's unfortunate because, whenever anytime we're having a conversation about drugs, I always think about athletes in my sport like Shane Hammond and Oscar Chaplin. And if you don't know who those athletes are, just kind of Google them. But Shane was the strongest super heavyweight we've ever had in the US. Oscar Chaplin was one of the most talented athletes that we've ever had as well. And they both competed in 2000 and 2004 Olympics. And Oscar Chaplin won the junior worlds at one point, and he's being tested all the time. Probably 15 to 20 times a year. And the unfortunate sad thing to me is that we will never know how good those guys really were. They never won Olympic medals. They never won, Oscar did win a junior world championship, but if everything was truly level, we could say that with certainty. Would they have won Olympic gold? Would they have been good enough to win Olympic gold? If I think about myself, never placed in the top 10 at a, international competition where the entire world was there. Would I have been a top 10 athlete, top 5, or on the medal stand, or even able to win if everything was truly level? That's kind of the saddest thing to me, is not really ever knowing how some of these athletes truly 100% stacked up.
Agreed.
I think that's a really interesting conversation, one that we could probably dive into a little bit more with regards to what is a level playing field?
Mhm.
What is what would be considered everyone having equal access to the same things? Because you're talking about is this delineation between taking a drug and not taking a drug, and then you put into the category something like creatine and saying like, okay,
Mhm.
that's another group that helps me build muscle and helps me get stronger, but it is on the legal side. Um, but it's kind of shades of gray. It seems like what's the delineation between something that is illegal and what is
Right.
allowed?
Mhm.
And from your perspective, like what would you consider to be that line of something that
Oh
is
man,
readily available that does a lot of these same things, but is not banned versus something that is banned?
that's a really great question, and it's a really hard one to
Mhm.
answer because I think to some extent, for me, it might come down to like what's a drug versus a supplement. So supplement is something that's sort of found natural within your food that you could just take in naturally, right? So creatine is an example. It'd be really
Mhm.
hard to ban creatine because the human body makes it, right? And you
Yeah.
take it in anytime that you eat meat and things of that.
Mhm.
Um, versus something that like I have to literally inject it or that's not a natural compound that I'm going to bring into my body. That now becomes a drug, right? So for example, caffeine is a drug, right? Caffeine's not a supplement. You don't make
Mhm.
caffeine in your human body. It's a drug that you bring in, and it has massive performance enhancing
Mhm.
benefits, like, huge. And actually, we do regulate caffeine within the competitive world. Like you're allowed to take a certain amount, but if you take more than that, you can test positive for
Mhm.
caffeine, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Sounds crazy, but it's definitely possible. So I think that would probably be like the simplest definition, but it's really hard to go out and regulate that even,
Mhm.
and to say is that truly, a good stopping point, um, on something like this.
Yeah.
That's a really, really, really hard question to answer. If
Mhm.
I had to, I'd say, natural compounds that you can find within your body versus not. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
man.
I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think that's what
Mhm.
I'm trying to get to here is that there's going to be shades of gray with this. People on the other side of the spectrum who do take it or that are competing with it, saying like,
Yeah,
where's that delineation? Um, you know, Access to things is a part of it too.
yeah,
Like the idea of saying like, you know, taking out the actual drug aspect of it.
right,
An athlete like yourself, Chad, or like myself that had access to an Olympic training center, and we got the best of everything that allowed us to train at the highest level versus
right.
people who, have nothing and are still trying to compete at the highest level. The
Yeah,
fact that we have the best nutrition, the best doctors, and the best access to sports psychologists and all these other things are in some ways obviously not changing the composition of our body, but they are performance enhancers. They work differently, but the fact that we have access to certain things gives us an edge on people that don't. So it becomes
Mhm.
like, well, where do you cut? Where do you change it? And Mike, the idea of saying drugs versus supplements is probably the
where we
most
are.
effective.
It's where we are, right? But
Yeah, it's the most
yeah,
effective, but it's not perfect. And I think that that's an
no,
important note here is that there will never be a way to be able to say, okay, what's clean, what's not clean,
Mhm.
what's okay, what's not okay, and then throwing this out there. And I just want to give your guys thoughts on this. It's been talked about a little bit, but would there be any benefit to having two categories and like having a drug category versus a non-drug category? And I always love it. I don't know if you guys remember
yeah.
seeing this, but back in the day, in the '90s, the SNL did
Oh
a
my God,
sketch
I
on the
love it. The drugged
all
Olympics.
drug
Oh my
Olympics.
God.
Phil Hartman was a weightlifter and he ripped his arms out and he was like bleeding doing the clean. It's one of the best episodes ever.
Mhm.
Phil Hartman, one of the best SNL
I mean,
wrestlers
the
ever.
question, the question would become like, who would go to the non-drug versions at that point, right? Like, we've already run this experiment, right? Like, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGuire literally saved baseball, like literally saved baseball with
Mhm. Mhm.
juice to the max.
Right.
Was it 98 or something like that? Like,
Yep. Yep.
and then it's been in free fall ever since. And like I just feel like we've already run that, And so if we're gonna allow it, like just allow it to everybody to the same extent, I guess as much as you possibly can. And then if you deviate from that, well, you broke the system even more than we let you. It's a really hard thing to do, but like I would go to the juiced Olympics for sure. I want to see some dudes throw 700 pounds over his head as opposed to 600.
Right.
You know?
Right. But would you want to compete in those games? I mean,
Oh
going to
God, no.
watch versus going to compete are different things. Like maybe the conversation for Chad, if you had
Right.
that available, Chad, would you have done it, or would you have preferred to do it in a place that was considered clean, where you were being conscious of the longevity aspect of saying, I don't want to do
Right.
something that might be detrimental to my body in the long run?
It's such a tough concept and question, but I think that I probably would have done it because, especially during my time, at least in the US, weightlifting was not popular at all. I mean, we weren't, I wasn't doing it for to be a famous athlete, you know, or for a lot of spectators. So like, you know, saying that me competing in the clean version versus the drugged athletes getting more exposure and a bigger audience, that would happen, but it wouldn't really have mattered to me because that's not what it was about anyways. But that's what would happen. I mean, that's the thing, you know, one of the things that I've learned about the drug conversation through the years is that most athletes, and I think a lot of this is because they just don't understand, or they're ignorant about a lot of the complete reality that that drugs are being used on the international stage in every sport. I mean, I would say probably every sport, and they're looking up and praising these athletes that have tested positive one or two, you know, however many times they've tested positive, yet they're still being held on this pedestal because they were allowed to come back in and they win another Olympic gold medal or whatever it is, you know. So they're not being punished in
Right.
any way, if that's what you want to call it. They're not being, you know, looked down upon. I mean, from some people they are, but from the masses they're not, you know. And so
Mhm.
it's another part of this conversation is, especially back in my day, you know, we were far below, um, you know, a lot of countries on the international stage. We struggled, incredibly struggled to even get a few spots for the Olympics every 4 years. And you know, anytime any of us tried to throw drugs into the equation, say, hey, it's drugs, that's partially true. But what I learned the hard way as well is that that's not the whole story. Like you said, Dave, at the training center, for example, you have access to a lot of things. And I think bringing this around to someone that's out there listening that might be considering taking them, or a lot of athletes that have taken them, they're taking them without even covering all of the basics, like
Right.
you know, like nutrition. Mike, of course you're going to say that. Sleep, how is your program and training? Are you doing too much? Are you um uh training at the level that you need to train at to optimize your performance? And the answer to all those questions, and many more that I could come up with, are no. But you're
Right.
going to go ahead and take this drug that is shown to be dangerous, just to skip those steps. You know, like, how good can you be without that, first of all? And then maybe if you want to consider doing it at that point, you know, it's just like skipping steps in anything else. And I think I fell into that a little bit as well. I mean, slept I mean, I was sleeping at least 8 hours a night, plus a hour and a half, 2.5 hour nap every day when I was training. I was eating really well,
Mhm.
doing everything I could other than drugs to be the best that I could be. But I did go through a phase where my mindset in my training was off because I was chasing unrealistic numbers, being up against these drugs. I saw, you know, I just snatched 150 kilos, for example, and I knew that the world record was, I think, maybe 177.5 kilos at the time. So I
Yeah.
was like, instead of aiming my training for 151, I was aiming for 160. I just did 150. I wasn't satisfied. 151 wasn't going to be good enough. I needed 160 so I could try to get above that and get closer to these athletes. And I spent many years kind of working myself backwards. And so I guess with that story, I'm just saying, you know, what else can you do? What else can these athletes do to help reach their potential without going to this extent?
Mhm.
Yep,
Totally.
absolutely. I think that's a good place to finish up the conversation here, and these are the kind of things that I think are ongoing. I really enjoy talking about this because I think it's a fun kind of playground to discuss what the sport can look like in the next 5, 10, and beyond years. Not just our sport that we're talking about here with CrossFit, but even weightlifting, obviously, but sports like gymnastics too probably are dealing with this without us even knowing about it. So,
Yeah.
Mike,
I will add one thing really quickly, which is I don't
yeah.
think that the vast majority of people that you're going to see this week competing at the CrossFit Games are taking performance enhancing drugs.
Right.
I really
Can you say that again? You do not think?
I do not think. I really do not.
I agree.
I know many of them on a personal level, and they're literally terrified to take aspirin or cold medication because they don't want to end up on this list. But that's just faith. I've seen blood work from, I would say, over 40 CrossFit Games competitors, including CrossFit Games champions. And there's very telltale signs when you look at a person's blood work to see whether or not they are or are not taking performance enhancing drugs, even in the off season, right? And I've had client conversations where I've literally said, hey, listen, I know you haven't told me this, but look at your blood work, you're definitely taking something. Like, I'm not going to judge you, just tell me who you are or tell me what it is. And inevitably, like, yeah, you're right, I am. And it's never, ever, ever been a CrossFit Games athlete that's had that issue with me. But I have seen these people, and there's no clear tell signs from testosterone, estrogen, sex hormone binding globulin that they're taking something, and it is very easy for the most part to tell when someone is. So I can't guarantee there's not going to be someone in the field. I just had my first athlete that I've ever worked with personally test positive. It was a bummer, but they're out there, but I don't think it's the vast majority of athletes.
I think that's awesome to hear from someone like yourself, Mike, that works with athletes at the level that you do, and the fact that you get to see their blood work. I think it's really reassuring to the community in the face of what we've seen recently with so many positive tests of teams and individuals. It's nice to hear. I wasn't expecting you to say that, and it's really reassuring and encouraging going into Madison this week. With that being said, Mike, this is coming out after the games, but predictions from your end. And maybe it's difficult to do because you have so many athletes that you're helping out that are competing this week, but anything you imagine that might be out of the ordinary in terms of what the podium might look like?
I mean, oh God, it's so hard with so many athletes. I don't want to piss somebody off, but I am really excited to see what Mal will do at the games. She's worked really hard. She's dialed in so many different things. I'm really excited to see what she can bring. And on that side of things, on the men's side, I do think that there's sort of like, obviously Justin's incredible, right? Like, he's going to be hard to beat. Vellner's always going to be there. I'm really excited to see what some of that new blood does. Somebody like a Dallin Pepper who's competed and won the teenage games division 3 years and is now sort of, he's not a boy anymore. Like, that is a freaking man over there. And he's not scared. He's not nervous about going and competing with those guys. So yeah, rookie conversations for sure are always, you want to get ahead of yourselves, but I do think that this is going to be that continued turnover. We saw it last year on the women's side with Emma, Mal, this year again with Emma Lawson. I think the men's field is going to have that same flair to it, even though Justin's still a relatively new name.
Love it. I love it. Well, we got some things. This is obviously coming out afterwards. We'll be able to see how those predictions did. But Mike, before we get out of here, anything else you have going on that you want people to know about?
No, not really. Just the same stuff as always. Guys, if you enjoy, learning from me and stuff, go out, check out our website. The education platform is a cool thing, but honestly, this has been great. I always love coming to talk to you guys, and it's good enough for me.
Appreciate the time, buddy.
Awesome. Yeah. And one last thing before I close this out, I did just want to take a moment to say thank you for ending with the confirmation that you don't feel most athletes by and far are taking anything, because that's important to me, because as a weightlifter on the other side of that, because I was a weightlifter, because I had a certain look to me, because I was lifting a certain amount of weight and was successful over on this side of the water and in the US for sure. for sure I had people saying that I was on something. So, I very much appreciate you saying that. And to the listeners, I just want to make sure that you don't just assume that all weightlifters or all elite CrossFitters are taking something. Most of them are not. And I think that's important to remember. But at the same time, the reality of sport is that some people are, and we just got to continue doing the best we can to figure out ways to catch him, if it's going to continue to be against the rules, and try to stay in as level of a playing field as we possibly can. But Dr. Mike, I'm going to call you that from now on. Very much appreciate you joining us as always. And as always, to our listeners, we appreciate you listening in. Be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.